There's really a great new book out, really smart book, by the way, and that's what you're all about in my audience. The Fiery Angel, Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West by Michael Walsh. Michael, how are you, sir?
Fine, Mark. Thank you so much for having me on. It's good to talk to you again.
It's my pleasure. Now, this is a fascinating book because it's written differently, really, than any book I've ever read, because you pull from culture, you pull from art, you pull from philosophy to make the point. And your point is the West is dying. Our culture is dying. Go ahead. You explain it.
Yes, our culture is dying because we've been cut off from it, Mark. We've been cut off from it by the Frankfurt School of Philosophers, which was the subject of the preceding volume for this book called The Devil's Pleasure Palace. And because they want us to be to hate our own culture, they first had to make us ignorant of our own culture. So this book is a prescriptive counterattack on them. This is what you need to know in order to be able to fight back politically. I think too often people think the arts are just frivolous entertainment. They're not. They're the soul of a culture, and they're where our politics come from.
Now, the arts. Let's talk about the arts for a second. This Samantha Bee, these nighttime shows and so forth and so on. You would include that, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, they're examples of popular culture, but my book is much more focused on real art, painting, poetry, music, opera, the Aeneid by Virgil, Plato and Aristotle. I know you've touched on Plato in one of your books. Just these bedrock foundations of our culture. That's primarily what I'm focused on, to reconnect us to our Greco-Roman Judeo-Christian heritage.
How do we get people to focus on this?
Well, I think we got to start reading again. I mean, you know, we cannot be completely consumed by our cell phones and our smartphones and our tablets and all this transient stuff. What I really wanted to do, Mark, in this book is write a book about politics without mentioning a single contemporary politician. I didn't want to talk about Obama and the Bushes and Trump. I mean, I wanted to have nothing to do with that. I wanted to really talk about the fundamental issues, because that way we are talking about things that the Greeks dealt with, the Romans dealt with these same problems, the Middle Ages dealt with these same problems. And we just keep thinking our experience is completely sui generis. No, of course not. And if we just connect ourselves back to our own culture, we can stand up to the cultural Marxists, we can stand up to the Islamists, and we can say this far and no farther. We must do that.
And you do call them cultural Marxists, which is a good phrase.
I think it's a fine phrase. I just read today that it's an example of the neo-Nazi alt-right, which is, you know, the left is so crazy now that I hesitate to even look at anything that they
Well,
write.
you offended them. You nail it on the head, you see.
Yeah, apparently I have offended them, and I'm all broke up about it, as you can tell.
Yes.
So we're gonna get them, and this book is meant to give every parent, every college student, every high school student, every kid who wants to learn about his own culture. You know, you want a great story? Read the Aeneid. Just read the Aeneid. It's about the founding of Rome. How cool is that? Maybe you watched Rome on HBO when it came out 10, 15 years ago. Well, this is the real, you know, the great original Virgil poem. It's about heroes, and it's about the sacrifices we make, and it's about the decisions you have to make. When Aeneas has to leave Dido in Carthage and go off to found Rome, he's torn between the greatest love of his life and his duty to his mother, Venus, and to history and to everybody else. I mean, it's heartbreaking. So this is what I want to reconnect our own culture back with our great stories, because they're amazing stories.
Well, your book does this because, you know, you get into one of my heroes here, Aristotle, and also one of the great, more modern thinkers, probably not way out there, but still somebody that caught my attention when I was young, the late Alan Bloom.
Yes.
So you cover a lot of territory. Tell me what you think about Alan Bloom and why you included him in your book.
Well, I think The Closing of the American Mind was a very important book. It came out in the 80s, as I recall, Mark, and it got a lot of attention. I was writing for Time magazine at that point, and I'm sure we wrote quite a bit about it. And he sounded this warning bell, 30-some years ago, and it's only gotten worse. And we are creating a culture of ignorance, which is exactly what they're counting on in order to undermine us. They take our moral principles out from underneath us. Forget religion. This is one of the arguments I make. a lot of these principles come before there even was organized religion. And organized religion, which is at once revelatory and codifying, it's taken many of these things and created a religion around them. And our religion is about heroism and about individual destiny and about the importance of standing up and doing the right thing. And what's not to like about that? How can you hate Western culture, Mark?
And yet you are a religious man, are you not?
Well, I'm a cradle Catholic, so that, that comes with all that comes with, and I do try to go to Mass as often as possible, and I would say I am a conservative cradle Catholic.
I just want to make sure people don't think you're Sam Harris or something like that.
No, I'm absolutely not. And both Devil's Pleasure Palace and Fiery Angel have strong religious discussions in them, primarily religion as story rather than religion as theology. But, for those who are theological, we can mix it up in these pages as well.
My concern is people can go all the way through the government school system and never read anything about Aristotle.
Correct.
Isn't that shocking?
Well, of course it's shocking. They took it out. When I went to high school. Now this is back in the Stone Ages, but I had to take Latin. As a freshman in high school. That connects you to everything about the ancient world, including all the modern Romance languages of Europe. So naturally, we don't study it anymore. Why would we? It's just this. It's been I really do think it's been a kind of plot to cut the West off from its well springs, and you see the results in the coarse cultures. You mentioned Samantha Bee. You don't really have to look any farther than her to see how coarse the culture has become and how evil the left is, because they use this kind of thing against us, and they all think it's just hilarious. Well, it's time to push back against these people.
And it's everywhere, isn't it? You look at the media. I mean, the media are they're dripping with this anti, or as you call it, cultural Marxism, are they not?
Yes, they are. They're like sniggering little children, as you know. Someone uses a naughty word, and they all snigger, and they all have to write a story about it. I mean, honest, Mark, I started in journalism in 1972, so I've been at it quite a while. I've never seen it. It's just complete corrupted crap at this point. It's disheartening after having spent so much time to see what reporting has now become. It's about gossip, it's about gotcha, and it's about dirty words. It really is like the teacher left the classroom and all the kids are running around crazy. It's just appalling.
Just so people know a little bit about your background, you've been a journalist, as you point out, but you've spent a lot of time as a screenwriter.
Yes, that's true.
What kind of screenwriting have you done?
Well, I wrote screenwriters. You can always ask them, what movies have you done? And we're going to name 20, but you haven't seen them because most of them haven't gotten produced. That's not fully the goal of screenwriting. I wrote a movie called Cadet Kelly, to start with, the one that did get produced, which was a huge hit for the Disney Channel, about a little kind of hippie girl who gets sent to military school and has to learn discipline. And it was a fun movie to write. I wrote it with the great Gail Parent, my co-writer. We had a great time doing it. But I have a couple scripts that are out right now in the production pipeline, and one of them is called Charlie, which is about the Cold War, which I experienced and lived through living in Germany and in the Eastern Bloc during the period the wall came down. I've got a movie about Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday, which we're out to directors on right now, and that's a wonderful story about the two greatest singers of the mid-20th century. So things like that. And whatever interests me, I write. I worked on a big project that was set in Shanghai. It's a fun profession, and you don't bring politics into it. That's the whole key to success in Hollywood.
There have been a number of, at least to me, very important journalist philosophers. People who've seen things, they write about things, and then it causes them to think more deeply. Well, you remind me of that.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's very. I wouldn't call myself a philosopher, but what I would say is I had an unusual background. My father is a Marine Corps officer. Today's his 92nd birthday. He was awarded.
Amen. God bless.
God bless him. He was awarded a Bronze Star at the Chosin Reservoir, one of the greatest battles in the history of the United States Marine Corps, and he came home to father 4 more children after me. So happy birthday, Pop. Mm-hmm. I have this odd background where.
What is his name?
His name is John Joseph Walsh, retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps.
Well, we salute him. God bless you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. But we moved around, so you don't have a consistent school, you don't have consistent friends. All I had, besides my family, was books and music, because I'm a pianist, and so I just learn to turn inside, and we traveled all over the world. And if you open your eyes and see things, and of course I was a foreign correspondent for Time magazine during the Cold War, you can put things together, is my point. And most journalists don't do that, and it's a shame. They don't have the language capacity, they don't have the historical knowledge, and they don't, frankly, have the curiosity anymore. And I'm sorry, because it leaves the American public severely undereducated.
Well, it's great reading you and your columns as well as or your op-eds. They're always fun to read, too. But I want to strongly encourage you folks, get The Fiery Angel. That's the name of the book, The Fiery Angel. Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West. Michael Walsh. We will link to this. You can go on Mark Levin Show Facebook, Mark Levin Show Twitter, marklevinshow.com. You can go directly to Amazon, but I would encourage you to get it. And God bless you, my friend. Great job.
Mark, thank you so much for all your kindness over the years. It's a great
I'm Dennis Prager. Thanks for being with me. One of my favorite thinkers living today is Michael Walsh. Been on the show any number of times. Former music critic of Time magazine, novelist, screenwriter, columnist for the New York Post and PJ Media. But the reason, there are many reasons I adore him, and he's a fighter. He's very, very deep. I love that. He thinks through the big issues. He's a fellow ultimate issues man. That's what he cares about. His great new book, just out 2 days ago, is The Fiery Angel: Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West. That is one big chunk, but he writes very, very... look, the guy wrote for Time, so he knows how to write like a journalist. In other words, in an interesting, accessible way. He does not write in professorese. My first question to you, Michael Walsh, is where are you?
I'm in beautiful rural New England in the state of Connecticut, Dennis, up in the hills near the Berkshire Mountains.
Now, do you live in both Connecticut and Ireland?
Yes.
Okay.
And in L.A., too, at times, so, yeah.
Are you fleeing the federal authorities? What's the story?
Well, it's a good question. I like to be in places that are congenial for me to write what I'm writing, and I've written almost all of my 15 or 16 published books in my house in rural New England, which is quite secluded and has all of my personal library and thousands of records and everything I need, in my piano, my 1892 Steinway. So I feel very comfortable working on a book like The Fiery Angel here because, as you know, it's a big work of cultural criticism, and I needed all that culture close to hand.
Right. Forgive me for just asking you, how does the 1892 Steinway sound?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's a Model F. It was one of the first pianos that Steinway built for New Yorkers when they were moving into apartments, so they didn't have room for full-fledged grands, but it's an upright grand is what they called it at the time. And I've had the action completely restored, of course, and it still needs a little bit of work in the strings and the felts, but she's a beauty. She's not a great Liszt pianist, Dennis. I'm playing the Hungarian Rhapsodies right now, and the top isn't quite as brilliant as you'd want it to be on, say, a Horowitz-style big Steinway. But for chamber music and Brahms and Beethoven.
All right. By the way, my dear listeners, before I start with his great book, he threw out another term. This is a story you may not even know about, although I wouldn't bet on it given how much you know about music. But you mentioned Horowitz-style Steinway, and my listeners may not know, Vladimir Horowitz was the legendary pianist in the mid-20th century, early and mid-20th century. You could hear his recordings. The man had beyond belief technique. But did you know, and I don't think this is what we call an old wives' tale, that he traveled not only with his own piano, but with his psychiatrist?
I don't know about the psychiatrist part. As you know, Dennis, I went to Moscow in 1986 with Vladimir Horowitz and his piano and his wife, who was the daughter of...
Well, wait, then maybe it is an old wives' tale, and you do not recall a psychiatrist being on board?
No, not at all. And
okay.
We were on the plane together. We were in Moscow and in Leningrad together. So it's possible, but
No. I'm very happy to have it refuted. I didn't say it as a negative. Mm-hmm. I just thought he was a character, correct?
Oh, he was quite a character. He was one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life, and I was actually just saying to someone recently when they said, "What was Horowitz like?" I said he was like a very puckish small child combined with an idiot savant. And in other words, he wasn't the kind of guy you wanted around socially because he was so tightly wound and had such a kind of like a puckish sense of humor, as I said before. But what a great artist at the keyboard, and as neurotic as can be, needless to say. But an example of how artists are dysfunctional people, but we have to leave them dysfunctional in order to have their art. Trying to cure them of their dysfunction robs us of their genius.
Well said. All right, now to the book. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Walsh, a serious thinker on serious subjects. The Fiery Angel, Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West. One of his ideas, theses, if you will, is if you don't believe in anything, then you won't survive. Is that a fair way of stating the crisis of the West in a nutshell?
Yes, it is, Dennis. It's without knowing what where you've come from, then you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're going, and therefore you've been cut off from your own culture, which I believe was a deliberate attempt by the cultural Marxists of the Frankfurt School, which was the subject of my first book, The Devil's Pleasure Palace. I believe that was their attempt to cut us off from our own culture, which would effectively leave us defenseless against either nihilism or the imposition of Islam or whatever other new ism they wanted to foist on us.
Folks, this is so important. This is my theory on this, and I want your reaction. If I were to ask the average college student today, certainly at an elite college, what do you or what should America stand for, I think they would probably say tolerance. But that doesn't mean anything. It's a wonderful trait, tolerance, but if you don't stand for anything, tolerance is meaningless.
No, I agree. I often say on Twitter, diversity is not a goal, tolerance is not a virtue, and hate is sometimes a very useful self-protective emotion. That would drive them insane, but I believe all three of those statements to be true.
So, all right. So the thesis of your book is also that the arts have a significant role to play in telling us who we are. And you use the example of New York City schools. I've often commented on this, just stopping arts education. Today, who I want my listeners to answer this question. Do your kids play a musical instrument? The odds are no. But 2 generations ago, is it fair to say that a majority of Americans gave their kids music lessons?
I would say Patty's fresh off the boat, like my own dear beloved Irish family, insisted that their children take music lessons. It is very unusual but just to take my own family for an example. My father's the family came over from Ireland, which is actually where I own that house now, where my great grandmother was born in Ireland. They were poor. They worked. My grandfather worked in the Converse All-Stars shoe factory in Malden, Massachusetts, and his son became a Marine Corps officer who fought at the Chosin Reservoir, and among other things. And then his son, me, became a musician. So only because my lace curtain mother said all my children are going to have piano lessons if it kills them, and it took, especially for me and my brother. So I'm very grateful for that sort of civilizing impulse, which we've now lost, unfortunately.
There are 2 things that most American homes that had any money at all, and I don't mean rich, I mean even lower class but not impoverished, had. And that was a piano and a Bible.
Yes.
And now they have neither.
Yeah, well, I tell you, my Steinway, just since we mentioned it early, I bought that for $240 in 1972 or 3. It's been with me my entire adult life, and that's all it cost, $240. Now, that was a little bit more money in 72 or 3 than it is today, but it was certainly affordable. And instruments are very affordable. I mean, you can spend all you want on an instrument, or as little as you like. But I must say, Dennis, I'm always somehow surprised when I walk into someone's house, someone with money who has a nice big house, and there's no piano in it. I don't understand why there isn't one. I'm just so used to seeing it.
Not only forget no piano, you're really going for the stars. How about no books?
Well, no books. Yeah, as I mentioned, I have a library here, and I'm not kidding. I actually built a wing onto my house to house all my books, so I can walk in and they're all on the shelves and they're all organized, and I can find everything I want. And that, to me, again, is just part of life. But let me just say this, because it sounds like I grew up in a very cultured household. I grew up in a Marine Corps household. It's quite a bit different. I came to the arts on my own, effectively, thanks to my mother and then my own natural inclinations and abilities. And I hate the fact that what I've spent my entire life learning to master, such as I have, is now regarded as a waste of time. That, in fact, it's evil. Western culture is evil. It's racist. It's homophobic. It's bigoted. It's dead white men. It's blah, 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 blah. So, I mean, you and I grew up in an era where you had to know these things or you felt ignorant.
Exactly. Hold on there. I want to tell everybody, Fiery Angel, the Fiery Angel is up at DennisPrager.com by Michael Walsh. 1-8-Prager-776 is the number. We continue in a moment. All right, everybody, Dennis Prager here. Before I return to Michael Walsh, a word about Michael Walsh, the serious thinker, clear thinker. You know, it's funny. I was about to say conservative thinker, Michael, and it is amazing what it takes to be called a conservative. I mean, it is literally you want to conserve Western civilization and Western culture, which is his book just out 2 days ago, The Fiery Angel, Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West. So that's what the book is about, and it shows you how Western civilization's arts and culture have illuminated our way, and then a vast number of people have rejected it. So here's the hardest question of all. Something so beautiful and so elevated as Western culture, why would it breed so many people who loathe it?
There is an answer to that question, Dennis, and I think it's the very strength of Western culture that does it. And you can call it the Hegelian synthesis of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. You can call it syncretism, in which the West, which is now turned into a dirty word called cultural appropriation, but the West takes elements of other cultures and turns them and Westifies them, so to speak. But we always have these yeasty seeds of destruction in everything that we do, and we have to be very careful to unleash the dark side without giving in completely to the dark side. And that's why, as a conservative thinker and a policy person, I've tried to reestablish the importance of the arts with both these books, and to explain to people that conservatives have the easier task. We are conserving what is good. The left needs to move the football constantly, because once they achieve a goal, they move on to the next one. They keep pushing, But every time we give in to them, we've enabled them to keep pushing. But if we stand fast, as we can learn from our own culture, from the Greeks to the present, if we stand fast, we can beat them. And we do beat them. We beat them every single time, but it's when we give up on ourselves that we lose.
So as I've told my listeners, and Sean, please get the gamelan music ready. The New York Times chief music critic, Anthony Tomasini, lambasted President Trump for saying that Western civilization needed to be preserved And he used the example of the great music that we produced, like the symphony. And then he wrote, I don't know if you know this, he wrote in the New York Times that what is the president talking about? Beethoven's Third is no better than Indonesian gamelan music. So knowing Beethoven's Third, but not knowing Indonesian gamelan music, I thought, wow, I really may be missing something. Sean, do we have it here so that Michael Walsh can hear it? Sean? We don't have the gamelan music? Oh, bummer. We used to play it. But trust me that with no insult intended, I am sure it is very meaningful to Indonesians who love it. I think Beethoven's Third, and so do Japanese, and so do Indonesians, probably, or many who know it, think that Beethoven's Third is greater than any other music.
Well, I'll tell you about the Balinese gamelan. That's a good example. Debussy Claude Debussy, the great French composer, turn of the century, last century, heard the gamelan orchestra in Paris at one of the World's Fairs.
Oh, wait a minute. All right, excuse me. Okay, we do have it.
Here we go.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, Michael, you get the idea.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
right.
I was saying, Debussy used some of the sounds of the gamelan in his orchestrations. He tried to evoke that because he was entranced by the sound of it, not by the content of it. So we culturally appropriated the Balinese gamelan, and I make a point of this in The Fiery Angel. It's why we still think about the Balinese gamelan, and it's why the West is talking about it to the extent that we are. But it's a silly notion of cultural equivalence out of some sort of weird guilt to say that,
is that, so wait a minute. Is that your answer? I asked you the question, why would the West produce people who deny the superiority of Western culture? This doesn't mean, by the way, just for the record, in case many of my listeners went to graduate school and have been somewhat confused intellectually, to say that Western culture is superior does not mean that Westerners are superior. There are evil Westerners and there are beautiful non-Westerners. We're just talking about cultural issues like, let's say, music. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, let's give an example of it. The reason that this compact disc is the length that it is, do you know why that compact disc is the length that it is?
You mean 80 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's because the Japanese wanted something that would contain the entirety of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Oh, is that fast? The Japanese.
The Japanese, because, Dennis, the Ninth Symphony is one of the most popular pieces of music in Japan.
That's right.
It is played every New Year's Eve all over the country. Mm-hmm. And so when the Japanese engineers from Sony were deciding what the length of the CD should be, they didn't want to have to turn it over like you do with an LP to hear the finale of
I did not know the origins of the 80-minute CD. That's terrific. I have told my listeners that, too. The greatest Bach interpretation today is coming from Japan.
Yes, and the greatest Mozart piano, Mitsuko Uchida. I mean, there's plenty of great Asian musicians. So it's just silly to say that there's some kind of equivalent.
All right, so now I want to challenge you. Okay. So this is a very serious challenge. And I'll say it now, and you'll answer it when we come back. So, given what we both believe about Western arts, how do you explain Nazi Germany, which loved Mozart and loved Bach, well, not so much Bach, and loved Beethoven and loved Wagner and built Auschwitz? That's the $64,000 question. We'll be back in a moment. The book is The Fiery Angel. The author is Michael Walsh. I'm Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager here, and final segment with Michael Walsh, whom I love to talk to. It's obvious to you, I'm sure. A major thinker. The book out 2 days ago, The Fiery Angel, Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West. That's exactly right. There is a struggle for the soul of the West. But I asked you a question that has bothered me since I was a kid, because I thought about these things when I was a kid, believe it or not. And with all of our both commitment to the excellence and the power of Western art, nobody appreciated, the great painters and the great music more than the Nazis, and it obviously didn't affect them morally. So how do you explain that?
Oh, well, okay. This is. Why don't you ask me something hard next time, Dennis, and we'll. Like why Mozart is better than Haydn, or some non-controversial
right,
thing that
right.
we can discuss over a beer. Seriously, let me just preface what I'm about to say with what I'm doing now in both of these books, in Devil's Pleasure Palace and in The Fiery Angel. What I and a group of partners are trying to do is reestablish the connection politically in our country and in Western Europe of the arts, the importance of the arts to understanding the political situation, because the arts adumbrate, that is, forecast and reflect upon the political situation. They are the canaries in the coal mine, and in The Fiery Angel, I give numerous examples of how this happened. One of them is the collapse of the Soviet Union that followed just less than 5 years after Horowitz was there, and I connect those two things. Now, as to this particular question, one of the things I've done here is to show you how the arts can change the world so quickly, for good and for bad. So the first one, I have a list of events, which goes like this. Beaumarchais' The Marriage of Figaro, Mozart's opera, The Marriage of Figaro, the French Revolution, Beethoven's Heroic Symphony, and Napoleon. Now, we won't go into all the details here, except to note that The Marriage of Figaro play and opera came out very close to each other, and within 5 years, the French monarchy was gone. And this play and this opera forecast that and told the Bourbons that they were doomed. The second list I have is Count Gabbana, who was a racial theorist of the 19th century, Father Jan, who is the father of the physical culture movement in Germany, but was also an extreme racist, Wagner, who we know, World War I, communism, and National Socialism. So you ask about Hitler and the Nazis. Having spent so many years of my life in Germany, speaking German, raising both my children there, in the German educational system, I got a pretty good look at the Germans up close. And I would say this, that the Nazis had no moral appreciation of the arts. They saw them as a tool for propagandizing. And as I've often said, Hitler thought, as a huge Wagner fan, which he was, thought he was staging Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg, Wagner's great celebration about the power of holy German art in the Middle Ages. But what he really staged was Götterdämmerung, which was the total destruction of everything. There was a nihilistic streak, very strong, in the National Socialists. And so I would say Hitler expropriated Wagner. He found in Wagner's own anti-Semitism a legitimizing tool for his feelings, but all it did was destroy the country that has not recovered from Hitlerism to this day. So the arts were used for evil, and they were used for propagandistic purposes and non-artistic purposes.
I have one more question.
Yes, sir.
In the United States, and I assume in the rest of the West, this I know for a fact, unfortunately, because I know, especially I know the musical world fairly well, and people are in contact with me from different orchestras. Overwhelmingly, people in the arts are on the left. Why is that?
I think because they've been corrupted. I don't necessarily think that was true, although certainly true in the mid-19th century when leftism was connected with nationalism. And now, of course, the situation has flipped. I think the post-war critical theory attack on the arts, especially in music, which took music completely out of the intellectual equation, has made people think that it's the point of the artist to be in permanent rebellion against the political society in which he finds himself. And in fact, I have a chapter on politicized art in The Fiery Angel.
Okay, everybody, listen, I love talking to you, as is obvious. Keep writing, keep playing. The Fiery Angel, it is up at DennisPrager.com. God bless you, Michael Walsh.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm Dennis Prager. You know, I stated something to Michael Walsh, and if I'm allowed to comment on my own comment, it actually stayed in my mind. It's an odd thing to say, something I said, stated my mind. But it was, I think in terms often of the visual. I have always a visual analogy for my concepts, which helps me and helps people who hear me. And I just came up with this line, which I want people to think about, and I want to continue to develop. The average home in America, I would say, any time in our history till 1950, till 1960, had a Bible and a piano in it. The average home today doesn't have a Bible or a piano in it. I think the change is unbelievably significant. What elevates your kids? The piano elevated your kid's life. A kid would sit down and, play some Mozart, let's say. The Bible elevates your life. That was the way in which you formed the character of your children. Everybody quoted the Bible. Everybody. It was just, that was the lingua franca. That was the common language of America. So what elevates your kids now? And I use the word elevate because you have to elevate the human being because we're animals. I don't mean it in the MS-13 sense. I mean we're just animals. You can't elevate an animal. You can elevate a human. So if an animal has sex in the middle of 50 people watching, it doesn't mean anything. It's not degraded. If an animal defecates in the living room, it's only because we didn't train it well. But it's not, we don't condemn the animal. But we don't expect that behavior from humans. We hide the place of defecation in a bathroom because we elevate us. What elevates your kids? Grades don't elevate your kids. You could be a barbarian who gets an A. So there's no piano and there's no Bible. What elevates, even if you have an argument that, well, I have something that does, at least acknowledge it's not the thing that did it for all of American history. And by the way, that was true for all races, all creeds, all everything in America, the piano and the Bible. Nobody asks this question. What elevates kids? So it's a very big deal. That's what I was raised with the piano and the Bible. It's a very big difference in my upbringing from many of my peers. There's a piece today talking about my peers. A piece by Dan Henninger, the great Wall Street Journal editorial writer. This is the 50th anniversary of the 1968 class. And he describes what 1968 in America was like. The modern era of American politics, defined by polarization and nonstop intensity, began with the cataclysmic events of 1968, now celebrating, if that's the right word, its 50th anniversary. Everyone says the pace of events in the Trump presidency is overwhelming. Compared with 1968, the past year has been a walk in the park. 1968 was one of the greatest anni horribilis, terrible years, horrible years, ever to happen inside the U.S., producing war, assassinations, and riots. During the 2008 Democratic primary, Senator Barack Obama, who turned 7 in 1968, took a generational shot at Senator Hillary Clinton, who turned 21 at Wellesley. Senator Clinton and others, they have been fighting some of the same fights since the 60s. Well, yes, it's the fight that will never end. Henninger writes a very powerful piece. Then he documents, if you ever want to know what happened in the 60s, just look at what happened in 1968. I'm not going to read it all to you. You can see it there. The music, mayhem, and merriment were inseparable. It was a year in which the idea of inhibition died. That's a great line. It hasn't returned and likely never will. That's correct. That's right. That's what I realized. I if I may be personal here, so I was a kid in college then, and I remember feeling, and I think I've said this on the radio before, I felt that I was like an extraterrestrial when I was at Columbia University. Well, that was 70, 71, and 72, but it's the same thing. I really did. I had nothing in common with my peers, nothing. And one of the many, many differences was the sense of inhibition. I couldn't believe it. For example, public cursing, which I still contend is the broken window of civilization. Remember the theory that James Q. Wilson popularized, broken windows? If a society doesn't repair broken windows caused by criminals, you'll end up with rape and murder. So you better start with the broken windows. The broken windows of civilization is public cursing. I am convinced of that. Most everybody uses such words privately. I don't have an issue. All right? Some of you have an issue on religious grounds and other than I totally respect that. I don't curse a lot at all, even in private. But as I have always said, if a piano falls on your toe and you go, gosh darn it, you're a better man than I. Okay, that's fine. But the public, where you have the mayor, do you have Eric Garcetti from the Stanley Cup win of the Kings? This is the mayor of Los Angeles, just a few years ago when the Los Angeles Kings won the Stanley Cup, the championship in hockey.
But there are two rules in politics. They say never, ever be pictured with a drink in your hand and never swear. But this is a big day. Way to go, guys.
Now, so there's the mayor of Los Angeles saying in front of 18,000 people at Staples Center and to all the kids watching the F word in advance. It wasn't that it just came out. He said, oh, we're told not to say it, but hey, this is a big effing day. And he didn't say effing. He said the word. Let it all hang out. That was a motto of my generation. We'll be back in a moment.
Quite clear that it's all just a little bit of history repeating.
So it's a question you should think about if you're raising kids or your kids are raising kids. How are they being elevated? No piano and no Bible. How are they being elevated? We'll come back to that another time. Anyway, I read to you from the Henninger. A final thought here before we say goodbye today. Daily Wire has a powerful statement here. On Wednesday, videos made by the deranged gunman who shot up Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in February were released that appeared to reveal a possible motive of why he shot up the school. It's going to be a big event, the Parkland shooter said before laughing. And when you see me on the news, you'll all know who I am. I am nothing. I am no one, the shooter stated. My life is nothing and meaningless. I live a lone life. I live in seclusion and solitude. I hate everyone and everything. The 19-year-old said that his goal was to kill at least 20 people, saying, I had enough of people telling me I'm an idiot and a dumbass. You will all know who my name is. With the power of my AR, you will all know who I am. Unquote. There's a certain group of school shooters who engaged in fame-seeking behavior, Peter Langman, a clinical psychologist, told the Miami Herald. They want to be known. They want to change from a nobody into a somebody. And the only way they can think to do that is to kill a lot of people. I have mentioned on a number of occasions, and I have written, that when I talk to little kids, and I talk to every age group, so I like asking third graders, fifth graders, what do you most want to be? And you know what the most common answer is? Famous. But I never let that go. I then ask them the question, and it could be eighth graders, it could be high school kids. I then ask them, what do you want to be famous for? To which the response is, it doesn't matter. So I said, so if you were famous for eating the most hamburgers in an hour, that would be great. See, it's not famous for a cure for cancer. It's not famous for writing a symphony or a novel. It's famous for famous. So why not be famous for killing more kids than any other kid killed? Now, obviously, most kids don't think that way. I fully appreciate that. but you don't need a lot of kids to think that way. And if you don't think that that is related to the decline in any belief system, they don't believe in America and they don't believe in religion, then we have a very different grasp of what ails America. I'm Dennis Prager. Thank you for listening.
When Donald Trump started talking tough to North Korean President Kim Jong-un, the headlines read, "Trump pushes the world toward nuclear war." When Trump's tough talk brought Kim to the negotiating table, the headlines read, "Trump is so eager for peace that Kim will outsmart him." When Trump responded to Kim's shenanigans by canceling the summit, the headlines read, "Trump's summit strategy a failure." Now that Trump's cancellation has brought Kim crawling back to the table, the headlines read, "We journalists are so cross-eyed with hatefulness and left-wing bias, we don't know what the hell is going on. Please don't listen to us anymore. We're fools and knaves." All right, I made that last headline up. But future headlines we can expect to see include Trump denuclearizes Korean Peninsula, costing jobs for Asians, and how Obama's policies finally brought peace to Korea during the Trump administration. They say that journalism is the first draft of history, but they forgot to add that it's the first draft written by liars and buffoons. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show. All right, who have we got, Mike? We got Michael? Michael Walsh. I know Michael Walsh is a guy who hangs out in bars that I'm sometimes in. I give him a couple of bucks, maybe buy him a drink. But it turns out, who knew that he is an award-winning journalist, screenwriter, and author. In addition to writing a hit Disney movie, he is a former classical news critic and foreign correspondent for Time magazine. He's won the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award for Distinguished Music Criticism and the American Book Awards Prize for Fiction for his gangster novel and All the Saints. And now that I know that he's done all this stuff, I'm never buying him a drink again. His latest book is The Fiery Angel: Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle of the Soul for the West. And it says here on the sheet that it is out today. Is that correct?
That is correct, Drew. Yes.
Hey, how you doing, buddy? It's good to hear you.
Yes, good to hear you, too. Thanks for having me on.
It is a pleasure. So we're going to talk about your book, The Fiery Angel, but I want to talk first about some politics, all right?
Sure.
You were an early Trump adopter and a fierce Trump adopter, far earlier than me. And I think you deserve, cheers because the guy's doing a great job. So I'd like to hear how you feel about where Trump is now, what he's doing right, and what you think he's not doing right.
Okay, well, I was on Fox and Friends actually a week ago to talk about a column I wrote in the New York Post about how if the Trump administration is chaotic, let's have more chaos because obviously it's working. And just a few days ago, I was on Irish radio in my adopted country of Ireland, and they were saying, well, the Korea summit is off, and Trump just walked away from it. And I said, give him 5 minutes, and Korea will be back. And sure enough, it is, because they haven't read The Art of the Deal. They didn't live in New York. I lived in New York all during the sort of first Trump era in the 80s, so I got plenty of exposure to him. And what he's doing is no different from what he's always done. He plays the media like a fiddle, and he puts his last, best, and final offer on the table first. And then if you don't like it, he walks away. And then you chase him down the hall like Madeleine Albright chasing after Kim's father in North Korea. I mean, it's a funny spectacle, but it seems to be working fine. And I would, other than the fact that he churns a lot, which the media thinks is terrible, but I think is fine, I don't have any even grounds for criticism for what he's doing. You may not like him as a person, and who does, but you got to like him as a president. That's the point. That is the way I feel right now. The press, as far as I can see, is utterly disgracing itself. I mean, in ways that are kind of beyond. It disgraced itself. The press disgraced itself during the Obama years by not covering the things that Obama was doing, the IRS scandal, the Fast and Furious scandal, all the stuff that he was doing that was really bad. They just kind of turned a blind eye. But this, you mean like Benghazi? Yeah, I think there was a little Benghazi thing too. A little Benghazi going on. A lot of and I heard they've been spying on the Trump campaign, but we're not allowed to call him a spy. But do you see any chance? I mean, is it too naive? It probably is, but is it too naive to think that there's some chance that these guys are going to look in the mirror and say maybe we should clean up our act a little bit? We're not as bad as Trump says, but no, it's not going to. No, I've been in this business since 1972, and and I know a lot of the guys at the top of the media food chain. They're all superannuating baby boomers like myself. So we all started at the same time. We cut our teeth watching the Watergate coverage in 72, 73, 74, as that was all developing. And they will never go back on their core principles, which is to despise conservatism, America as founded, and Trump as the embodiment of that. They just won't do it. They'll go down with the ship.
They'll go down. So,
yeah.
Last question about this, and then we'll get to your book, The Fiery Angel. But do you see any, when you talk about the fact that you don't like Trump, and Trump is he's a hard guy to like. I mean, I wouldn't leave him alone in a room with my daughter. He's, he is a strange guy. Do you see any disadvantage of that? This is the thing we hear from the never Trumpers and the former never Trumpers, that we are making excuses for behavior so that and we won't be able to criticize the left for this behavior anymore.
Oh, that's the stupidest argument of all time. I mean, honest to God, grow up, people. And I'm talking to Ben Shapiro and Eric Erickson and David French and whoever else has been peddling this since the day Trump got elected. This isn't a morality contest. We are not electing the Pope. We are not electing the Pope. We just elected the Roman Emperor to sort things out. These people have got to get over themselves. I frankly find that argument incredibly offensive and very juvenile.
Wow. Okay. All right. And we're not allowed to
criticize. Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. But you know how I feel about this, Drew.
Yeah. I know. We're not allowed to criticize Ben Shapiro. He's paying for the phone line. So no. Oh. And I actually love Ben, so I will object. But here, let's talk about The Fiery Angel. I read your last book, and I've only started this one, and you are launching a deep defense of Western culture per se. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's absolutely true. It's a crusade, and I decided to use the word crusade. I am a proud, if honorary, graduate of St. Louis High School in Honolulu, Hawaii, class of '67, and we are and remain the Crusaders. So crusade is good enough for me. So,
give me a sense. Give me the short version of what it is about Western culture that you find unique.
Well, let me put it this way, Drew. I grew up in a military family. I moved every 2 or 3 years. So I'm in large respects an autodidact, which is, both a strength and an egregious failing, which means I had to come to culture myself. Luckily, I was a talented pianist and musician, so I won a scholarship to Eastman and the Eastman School of Music, where I practiced, learned the piano and the musical trade. But I had to come to culture on my own. And to see it now being stripped away from us after working all my life to master it insofar as I have, I take that personally, too. So this crusade is partly a rebellion against the trashing of everything that people of our generation, and I know you're 30, 40 years younger than me, but I just use that to make you feel like you're part of this conversation.
Thanks.
That we grew up believing to be true. And furthermore, it is true. Furthermore, the Western civilization is the best thing that ever happened to planet Earth. And to see it now denigrated and demeaned and called racist and all these Marxist isms is just intolerable. So I wrote Devil's Pleasure Palace in 2015. It turned out to be a surprise hit. And so Roger Kimball, who was a mutual friend of ours, commissioned the second book, which is The Fiery Angel, which is out today. And this one is more prescriptive. It's less an analysis of the cultural Marxist revolution that is tearing down Western society, and more of here's how you fight back. You have to know these works of art because, as I like to say, there's more wisdom in Homer than in the Kennedy School of Government about our political situation.
I mean, that is certainly true. I have a very similar background in the sense of having come to culture on my own. I mean, even though I went to college, I didn't get anything out of college except the books, which I then proceeded to read. And I had the exact same experience of thinking, oh Lord, this is really the pinnacle of human life. It's the pinnacle of human achievement. But there's a very distinct religious fervor. I mean, you use the word crusader jokingly, but at the same time, you talk about the fiery angel. You talk about you talk about culture as if it were conveying a deeply religious meaning. Isn't that fair to say?
Yes, it's absolutely. Excuse me. It's absolutely fair to say. And in The Fiery Angel, I went into a lot of religious stuff. Now, I know you're a convert to Christianity. You wrote that wonderful book called The Great Good Thing, which, by the way, I recommend to everybody to read.
Thank you.
No, it's just spectacular. But I'm a cradle Catholic, so I also grew up in that environment, and I've thought about this whole notion of God and man and where are we going and all that sort of stuff from both a religious and an artistic point of view. But the point I want to make is that the basic thrust of Western civilization, I believe, is the heroic narrative. We're all the heroes of our own movie. We're not cogs in a machine. You know, we're not just ants in the anthill. We're individuals with our own story. And that is the basis of Western religion, certainly the basis of Judaism and Christianity. But it comes even before there was Western religion, is my point, that it's something so deeply buried in the human psyche that I think it's a plant from God. So reversing ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, I like to say. Phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, and there's a sentence you can't wrap your tongue around 3 times in a row.
You know, it actually is. It's a wonderful point, and I noticed it in The Fiery Angel, that so many of the things that are conducted to us through Christianity were in the classical world. I mean, I frequently think of Plato and Aristotle as the Goyish prophets, you know, that they were they were prophets before we had Jewish prophets, or at the same time we had Jewish prophets, and really informed a lot of the Christian culture that finally came to us, and including the Romans' multiculturalism, the allowing people in. Now, you talk about being prescriptive. Mm-hmm. What is it that you want people to do? What is the call to action here?
Well, I want them to get out and read a book, for God's sake. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing I want them to do. And I want them to start with Homer and Aristotle, which are great places to start. But I also want them to understand that Western civilization isn't just sitting in the opera house, a place I've spent many, many happy hours of my life in professional and personal capacity. But it's also understanding, for example, there's a chapter on Beauty and the Beast. And we all know the fairy tale, and some of us read it in the Andrew Lang Blue Fairy book, and many of us saw the Disney version of it. But it has so much deeper resonance than just the cartoon or just what we think we know about it. So read that and then understand what it's actually trying to tell us. I also spent some time in this book, this is the X-rated part of the book, with the Arabian Nights, the 1001 Arabian Nights, as translated unexpurgatedly by Sir Richard Burton. And you will be stunned. Have you ever tried this? Pick up the Arabian Nights at random, and you will find pornography on every page. It is the sexual dysfunction of the Muslim culture is so spectacularly revealed in the pages of what you think of as Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. It's just amazing. So I picked 3 passages almost at random to show you why Islam has such difficulty integrating with the West, because our notions of the equality of the sexes are very Christian and come from Aristotle and Aquinas to us. But Islam rejected that, even though it translated Aristotle. It didn't learn the lessons of Aristotle. And it's one of the reasons these two cultures are so antithetical.
It is. I love the 1001 Nights, but the whole story is a woman telling stories to keep from getting killed because the guy kills his wife every night. So
she breaks off right at the good part every night.
Every night to keep him going. That's right. Yeah.
Right.
So is there anything, you talk about the culture coming under assault, but is there anything going on that you like? There are things that, aside from going back to the old operas and the old plays, anything on TV that you're seeing that you enjoy?
Well, I think there's a connection. What I'm trying to get at here is that there's a through line from all of these stories. I mean, there's only, a handful of plots, and Aristotle lays them out in the Poetics, especially the movie structure plot, beginning, middle, and end, reversals of fortune. Everything we know as screenwriters, Drew, is in Aristotle. So what I want people to do is, look at Breaking Bad, for God's sake. It's like a 5-year Shakespearean tragedy, right? Charting the downfall of a good man who turns evil. And I'm watching The Walking Dead. At this point, I don't know why, except that I feel like one of the zombies, and I'm waiting for someone to put me out of my misery. But we sort of admire the plucky band of heroes staving off this seething mass of pod people. And I think these things resonate throughout our culture, and even in the golden age of television, which we're living through now, we have great writers working on it. We have great stories, and they're the same stories. They're just clothed in different, zombie costumes. That's all.
So reading the old stuff actually informs your enjoyment of the new stuff. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
This is something that, if I lived almost half my life in Europe, so I spend a lot of time there. And you go into the art galleries and you see St. Jerome, and we see St. Catherine, and you see whatever in the paintings of the Renaissance and Middle Ages. And if you don't understand the Bible, you don't understand anything about what you're looking at in those pictures. And therefore, you don't understand when those characters come back, as they do constantly, in contemporary fiction. These are archetypes, and we now have been cut off from our culture, deliberately, I would argue, and do argue, so to make us culturally illiterate in our own world, and then we can be taught to hate it. And that's what's going on right now.
Michael Walsh, the author of The Fiery Angel, Art, Culture, Sex, Politics, and the Struggle for the Soul of the West. Michael, it's good talking to you. I don't see you enough. I hope to see you soon.
Oh, I'll be back in L.A. sooner than you think.
The drinks are on you. Thanks.
So I'm looking forward to that drink, by the way.
All right, we'll do it. Thanks.
Okay, anytime.
All right, it is nice to talk to him. I used to bump into him all the time, and now I don't see him that much. Sexual follies. Still cracks me up, that thing as a guy. Sexual. Now, I want to be careful about this. This was in the New Yorker, and it's called 7 Signs That Your Man's Masculinity is Non-Toxic. And it is written by Karen Shee and Jason Adam Katzenstein, and it's comedy. They mean it to be funny. And I didn't think it was that funny, but but the thing about it is I want to read it because it doesn't sound like a lot of people mistook it and they thought it was really the New Yorker telling you how to make sure your man's masculinity is non-toxic. They didn't see it as satire. And I just find this really fascinating. So just listen to it. It says, 1, he carries a tote bag that's at once pro-environment, pro-feminism, and pro-reading. 2, when he goes into a sports bar to use the bathroom, he buys a glass of white wine to be polite. 3, he openly cries during Pixar movies, even the parts that aren't sad, just beautiful. That one's pretty funny. 4, he opens doors for women at work, but they're metaphorical doors, like the ones that lead to promotions. 5, he laughs calmly when called a cuck. He laughs loudly when women are funny. He does not laugh when men are not. 6, he makes references to Kurt Vonnegut because he's genuinely interested to hear other people's opinions of Vonnegut's work. He never makes references to David Foster Wallace. And 7, he strictly follows all traffic laws when he plays Grand Theft Auto. His Sims world is a matriarchy. He does not have a Twitter account. What struck me about this, though, is first that it's so easy. It's so easy to look at it and think it's serious. I mean, when I first looked at it, I thought, I'm going to really go off on this to bring this in. And then I thought, well, it's got to be a joke. It's got to be. But it's so easy because it really does sound like feminism. It really does sound like feminism. I've got a PragerU video coming out. I've already recorded it. They haven't finished it yet. PragerU video coming out about why I oppose feminism. And it is because it mistakenly sees Western masculinity as inherently toxic. And the thing that, if this had been real, that, he carries a tote bag that is once pro-environment, pro-feminism, pro-reading, I thought, you better check his phone because he's probably dating another guy. I think that's a problem. But then I thought, all right, it's a joke. But then I thought, well, what is the joke? Why is it funny? Who is it making fun of? I mean, it really is, in some sense, making fun of the feminists who do this. They really do this. I'm not even sure the New Yorker understood what the joke was, because when you read this, you immediately say, why are we laughing? Why am I laughing when I'm saying, he openly cries during Pixar movies, even the parts that aren't sad, just beautiful, because that's something that, in other words, they're saying in order for your man to be non-toxic, he would have to be a woman. Isn't that basically what they're saying? And it's only funny. The only reason it's funny is because the feminists are really saying this. The feminists are really saying it. And it goes back to what I was saying about Morgan Freeman. I don't mean to just defend Morgan Freeman. I don't know what he's like I've never been around the guy. I don't know what he's like. But he is a terrific actor. He's been a wonderful presence. He's been a contributor to our culture. And I think when you pick on guys for just being guys, and, you know, there is this kind of edge to being a guy, just living as a guy, I think that you are doing serious damage to a world that has been essentially wonderful for women, really, the West, Western civilization. I'm Andrew Klavan. This is The Andrew Klavan Show.